In this video, we will be taking a look at what is probably one of the most thoughtless videos I've seen in quite some time. And it involves a jealous indie dev who is mad at Vampire Survivors all because his game didn't blow up like it did. And no, that is not a joke. So for some backstory, this guy we will be taking a look at today previously made a video jealously coping and seeding that Vampire Survivors was more successful than his indie game, and well, the reception on that video was anything but positive. So what does he do in response to that? He makes yet another video doubling down, which is the video we will be taking a look at today. The title of this video is Vampire Survivors Predatory? And comes from Gouthy Gogs, and you already know it's a great start when the comments are turned off. Now prepare yourselves for some of the biggest mental gymnastics that you've ever heard, as this guy tries to explain how Vampire Survivors is literally Hitler. Alright, well, without any further ado, let's jump right into this shit.
The following is an addendum to my previous video on the game Vampire Survivors. Please watch that one before continuing here.
I would also respond to the first video, but realistically, you guys aren't missing out on anything clever. You can watch it if you want, but this video we'll be responding today stands on its own 2 feet just fine.
If there's one video I've made I never expected to see any pushback from, it was my piece on Vampire Survivors. I'll readily admit that I'm not satisfied with how that video came out. I don't believe that it's up to the standard of depth and clarity that I always try to reach on this channel. I rushed the writing process for a number of reasons, the main one being I believed the game was so self-evidently worthless that I didn't have to explain myself as much as I usually do.
So let me get this straight. You were calling a game that the overwhelming majority seems to enjoy completely worthless with piss-poor arguments, and now you're shocked you got shit for it. Yeah, if you couldn't already tell, this guy is not exactly of the intelligent sort. Also, isn't the whole purpose of a video game to entertain? Wow, imagine that. And there is a literal shit ton of people who are thoroughly entertained by Vampire Survivors. So, going by that, how is the game completely worthless if its entire worth is to entertain, and it does it incredibly well? So, the literal crux of this guy's argument is fundamentally flawed. Just goes to show how much of a clown he really is.
While the overall reception was positive, it was one of the only videos I've made which reached outside the bubble of my usual audience, and so there was inevitably a handful of misunderstandings and disagreements I'd like to respond to.
This guy must have lost sight in both eyes, because the reception on his initial video wasn't overly positive, but in fact overly negative. And then he goes to paint everyone who disagreed with him as misunderstanding his point. Like, just shut the fuck up, bro. You weren't making that video only for your audience, as you claim, because otherwise it would be unlisted and only shared with your audience and no one else. You were hoping that your video would rile people up against Vampire Survivors so that you can feel less insecure about the quality and failure of your own game.
There's also some additional details about the game I'd like to discuss that I wasn't aware of when writing my initial video. The way I see it, there are 2 main arguments against my stance on this game, neither of which hold much water. The first is that Vampire Survivors actually involves strategic skill and gameplay depth. Now, what exactly about this game is supposed to be deep, I'm not sure. No one's been able to tell me yet.
So now this guy is going to ignore the counter-argument and claim that no one told him, which is a very clear lie. In fact, I'll tell you right now. It's number 1, your movement, and number 2, the items you pick up and the order you do it in. Obviously something like garlic is going to be generally better than something like bones. And if you get an item to max level, you can evolve it into a super powerful version. On top of that, if you want to kill the Reaper in the end and unlock a certain character, you need to completely change your strategy. And if you still want to claim that the game has no strategy, then go into a game, always pick the first option when presented with a choice, and run headfirst into enemy hordes at all times. See how well that plays out.
My best guess is people are referring to the character building system, but as I said in my prior video, the large number of build options doesn't create meaningful decision making, since the options you have available are decided randomly, and player control is so limited that what choices you do make have no real effect on your playstyle.
Because it's a roguelike, retard. Of course you're not going to get exactly what you want every time, which is why you have to adapt and roll with the punches and choose your items carefully. And that requires strategy. Sure, there is an odd chance that the game might completely fuck you over, but then again, the odds of getting a perfect build while still slim are higher than that. So that doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things, Is that clear enough for you?
Furthermore, the entire point of the progression system is to remove skill and decision-making from the equation. It's actually mathematically impossible to beat the game on a fresh save file. Your base stats are simply not big enough to outpace your enemy's growth. Despite a complete run of the game only taking half an hour, you are forced to grind item unlocks and permanent stat upgrades for several hours before you're even allowed to win.
That is a complete lie. It is entirely possible to beat the game on your first playthrough, although incredibly difficult. However, this literally applies to every roguelike in existence due to the nature of the genre, so I'm not sure how this is a point against the game. You'd think a game dev would understand such a simple concept, but that is apparently too much for this guy.
So if Vampire Survivors is intended to be a game of skill, it's not a very good one, is it? And this leads me to the second main argument. More commonly, I've heard people defend the game as a sort of turn-your-brain-off action game that's nothing more than a fun way to relax and wind down while listening to podcasts or whatever.
Oh, let's see what he's gonna say about this shit.
The YouTube channel Video Games Are Bad recently discussed this directly in a video titled Contextualizing Play, which described Vampire Survivors as a tranquil game. Now, I have no problem with games that exist to relax a player rather than challenge them.
Then where's the problem?
What is the problem?
And I think there's a tremendous amount of value in frivolous, unstructured play, as I've discussed in my video on Katamari Damacy. However, I flat out refuse to believe that Vampire Survivors is one of these tranquil games. To explain why, we need to look into the man behind the game. An interview with The Verge that I've linked in the description below explains that Luca Galante, Vampire Survivors' creator, previously worked in the gambling industry, and as Luca explains, the game was specifically made using the techniques and practices he learned while working on slot machines. This is the most damning thing anyone could ever say about their game, and yet in this interview it is treated as an unquestioned good.
So let me get this straight. The fact that he is using his knowledge from working on slot machines to make his game as entertaining and as dopamine-inducing as humanly possible is somehow a bad thing. Especially considering that you only pay for the game once. And unlike slot machines, there is no promise of you getting your money back or making money in general. Bruh, this guy might seriously have brain damage. He thinks that getting as much value out of your purchase as humanly possible is a bad thing. Let that sink in.
Just another reason that Vampire Survivors is such an exciting and fresh indie hit. This is not a game that exists to help you wind down, it exists to hook you. It wants dozens of hours of your life, not just the minutes you spend catching your breath on a lunch break. Purposefully indistinguishable from gambling design, it relies on random chance to produce outcomes, while retaining just enough skill in its gameplay to trick your brain into thinking that your successes and failures are your own.
They are your own, you mouth-breathing Neanderthal. Just because there is an element of randomness in the game doesn't mean you can't control the outcome of the game. This is literally how roguelike games fucking work. Also, you only pay for the game once. There are no follow-up payments, no microtransactions, no subscriptions, nothing like that. For all the developer cares, you can just buy the game and never open it once, he still gets his money. But I'm sorry guys, it's 2023 and it's a bad thing that you're having fun in a video game.
It operates on the same kind of loop which Natasha Dow describes in her book Addiction by Design, where she explains how gambling addicts typically aren't playing to win, but instead playing to reach a zen-like zone state, where the whole world falls away from them.
And in the context of Vampire Survivors, that is bad because... Oh wait, absolutely fucking nothing. Got it. I honestly can't even imagine being this fucking pathetic where I try to argue that relaxing in a video game is a bad thing.
The repetition found within devices like slot machines is one of the primary factors which sends players into this state, forming habits and then later addictions. Slot machine designers, of course, have become extremely good at exploiting that for profit.
Keyword, for profit. You don't need to pay every time you want to play a game of Vampire Survivors, and there is nothing promising you money if you beat it, which is why this entire comparison is completely fucking invalid.
It reminds me of one of my biggest bugbears within games criticism, the term gameplay loop. I despise it as a term, and I despise it even more as a concept.
And then you wonder why your game isn't successful.
Because even though game actions can always be boiled down into repetitive loops, good games, like say Resident Evil 4, strive to include variation within their mechanics and situations to continuously shock the player out of the loop, to keep them on their toes and prevent repetitive looping habits from forming.
And that is why randomness in roguelikes exists, to keep you on your toes and prevent you from using the most optimal strategy every time. So congratulations, you just disproved your entire argument against this game, and you are just that fucking stupid to not realize it.
But coming at game development with the idea that strict adherence to a loop is something admirable results in projects like Vampire Survivors, where gameplay can truly be boiled down into a single loop, every run the same as the last, hours upon hours bleeding together in a brain fog of nothing. You've reached that zone. You're not winning, you're not thinking, but hey, at least you're passing the time.
Do I even justify this horseshit with a response?
So whenever you hear the words gameplay loop, I want you to replace it in your mind with the words compulsion loop, because that's ultimately what games like this are. Systems crafted not to develop skills or ideas or narratives, but compulsions, stringing players along until they feel they have no choice but to keep playing again and again and again and again.
And how do they not have a choice? If they stop having fun, they can just turn off the game. I swear, the stupidity at this point is off the fucking charts.
As game designers, we have a responsibility to prevent malicious habits and addictions whenever possible, so slot machine design, as well as the people like Luca who openly brag about using it, should have no place in the games industry.
Ironically enough, that sort of design is the entire reason why the games industry even exists.
And the reporters who spread his drivel without questioning his background or intentions in any way should feel ashamed of themselves. Claiming that Vampire Survivors is harmless fun, knowingly or unknowingly, is playing defense for the exact same kinds of practices that casinos are built on.
So if you think Vampire Survivors is fun, you're supporting fucking casinos now? What the fuck is this shit? I already debunked this whole bullshit comparison, so I'm not going to bother wasting my breath repeating myself. But I like how he prides himself with being a game dev, yet he is now lecturing people how making video games fun is a bad thing. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if he's just fear-mongering to scare away game developers so he has less competition because he's that insecure.
It speaks to a blind spot gamers have, where because we get addicted to a game, it must therefore be good and well designed, and we seek out excuses to justify the addiction to ourselves.
It's an entertainment product. It's meant to entertain you. Holy fucking shit. This guy might genuinely be fucking retarded.
There's been a worrying lack of pushback towards the game, even from the people I normally would have expected to be speaking out against it. James Stephanie Sterling, for instance, is someone who has built their career campaigning against this exact strain of game design within the AAA industry, and yet here they are, sitting in Vampire Survivors' credits list as a writer for the project.
Yeah, and given that guy's track record, I don't know why you're expecting him to have any common sense in the slightest. You know this video is bad when he makes James fucking Sterling look good.
What people like Sterling have shown is that even the most ardent opponents of manipulative design practices will not only turn a blind eye towards them, but actively celebrate them as long as no microtransactions are present.
The funniest part about this is that he's not wrong about that. These people are complete hypocrites, but just not in the context of Vampire Survivors. Sorry bro, try again.
It is a phenomenally short-sighted viewpoint and has completely shattered my trust that anyone claiming to be an expert in this field actually cares about the well-being of games and the people who play them. And of course there are bigger fish to fry than Vampire Survivors. There are games that are more evil, more predatory, more manipulative.
So you admit that both your videos on this game are completely fucking pointless. Got it.
But my goal in crusading against this game is to remind everyone that it is not enough to just reject the monetization aspects of slot machine design. Art which serves no broader societal function than to cultivate habits and addictions should be shunned in whatever form it takes, and that includes Vampire Survivors.
And with that, we are finally done with this dogshit video. I find it funny how he's trying to quote crusade against this game, but almost no one actually agrees with him. But then again, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, so I cannot exactly say I'm surprised. Alright, well, be sure to like and subscribe to boost me in the algorithm. Thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.